The question I have, like with something we were just talking about right now, is just like the cost basis and risks that buyers have versus what sellers have. What are your thoughts around that? When you were going through and putting that deal together, did you think about those cost basis from a buyer and seller perspective, or the risks that you might have that a seller doesn't have? What were some of the decisions that maybe the older owner without the debt could have made that you couldn't make because of like not forecasting that? Part of all of that, and then you have some turnover with your employees. Were there things that you could have done to keep them there or keep things stabilized in doing your own deals and creativity? How do you kind of squash that fear from the seller? All right, welcome to another episode of Let's Buy Business. So we're going to dive in today with Ryan Hutchins. Another Ryan. We got multiple Ryans. I'm working with a ton of Ryans, and apparently it was like the most popular name in the 80s. So Ryan Hutchins is the founder of Peak Business Valuation. They're a sponsor of the show. They're also part of Amplio. They were acquired last year, but they're also just absolutely fantastic. Ryan and I hadn't connected in a few years. We had him on the show maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago. We got deep into connecting and personal acquisitions, and at a certain point I said, hey, we don't need to actually do the show today. Let's just catch up and we'll do it later. Okay. And we got to a point where we both had hard stops, but it started to get really, really good. And in the middle of it, he just goes, hey, let's just hit record. This is too good not to share. Okay. So it feels like you're jumping into the middle of a conversation because you are, right? But what we dive into with Ryan is his risk, right? He's built businesses, he's bought businesses, and he's sold businesses. He's been in your shoes before, whichever those shoes are, right? So we dive into his particular risk on certain deals. We dive into buyer and seller risks and the differences between the two. And we actually do that by diving into one of his businesses, right? So he's bought multiple businesses. We dive into one where it's had some ups, it's had some downs. We dive into what his risks actually were within the business and what the seller's risks were when he owned the business, which were very different. And one of the main things we talk about is cost basis, right? How much did it cost the seller to start that business a couple decades ago? It was a couple grand, right? Versus his cost basis to actually get into that business and acquire it was in a few million bucks, right? So a couple things about Ryan Hutchins too is he does about 20 to 30 business valuations a week, which is an absolutely insane number. And hundreds of those a year are SBA alone. So his brain is amazing. His experience is amazing. I've worked with him before. I've used him before. He's so good. And like, he's really been in your shoes as a buyer, as a seller, as a builder. Like I said, he had actually sold his own business. So you can find Ryan Hutchins at peakbusinessvaluations.com or amplio.com where they do those. So let's dive in. All right. So the question I have, like with something we were just talking about right now, is just like the cost basis and risk that buyers have versus what sellers have. And obviously they're wildly different. We were just talking about like cost basis for someone selling a business and the cost basis for someone buying. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I'll use a personal example. So when my partners and I bought a plumbing company in 2021, the guy who started the company started it in 1990 with very little capital injection. All he did was buy inventory, sold it, installed it, and continued doing that, and it turned into a business. So his
So when
cost,
you say buy inventory, you probably mean like a couple grand, right? Maybe
yeah,
less
just
than
a
that.
couple grand. He
Okay.
figured out that he could buy reverse osmosis being manufactured by someone on wholesale, buy 10 of those and sell them and make phenomenal cash flow and install the work. So, but his basis in his company when he started it was close to zero. It was just the cost of purchasing the inventory and selling it to other people. Whereas when we bought the business for close to 3 million. We had a seller note of 10%. We injected 10%, and then the remainder was SBA. And we
So
bought
you're at
the
2.6-ish, 2.5 on the SBA part. Okay.
yep, and we bought it in 2021. Yeah, once you buy a business and you lever it and you have this debt, your decision making ability changes because now you have less cash flow that the seller once had to make decisions with, and you have less because now you're servicing debt, and then interest rates nearly doubled. And so we lost an additional 50 grand in cash flow that went straight to interest. And so our ability to make decisions was just, hey, let's survive.
How did you Is that something you thought about before putting that deal together? I feel like many buyers, I bought a lot of businesses, you bought businesses. We don't think about that cost basis. And obviously, interest rates were really low for a long time. 2021 was sort of peak, like lowness, and then they doubled really fast and much more than that, right? Um, when you were going through and putting that deal together, did you think about those cost basis from a buyer and seller perspective, or the risks that you might have that a seller doesn't have?
No, not at all. We
Nobody does.
yeah, nobody does. We were just focused on the rate of return we were going to be receive. We're like, okay, cash flows X. Once we service our debt, set aside networking capital and capital expenditure needs, this is the cash flow left over to distribute to us as shareholders. And it's like that's all we cared about. And then when we actually own the business, it's like, oh, we thought about it completely wrong.
Everybody thinks about, oh, well, okay, so it makes $1 million a year, 500,000 goes to paying off debt, quarter, 200 grand goes into growth, and you're like, hey, we got 300 grand left. We're just going to be like, paying ourselves every month. Like, where would you change your thinking now that you've done that deal?
So now I've changed my thinking quite a bit. So when building out projections, I don't look at rate of return. I look at, okay, if revenue were to decrease 10%, 15%, would we still be in a position where we can make financial decisions with the cash flow to help grow the business from there? Because ultimately, the other piece that most people forget is no matter how much due diligence you do, legal, HR, financial due diligence, none of it really matters until you actually own the business and start understanding how the company operates. You have access to financials, you understand the people, understand that people are going to turn over. Kind of like the what came about through Dodd-Frank and the 2008 crisis with all the bank stress tests that they did. Like essentially my partners and I, when we look at a business, like we try to stress test it. Like what will happen in this scenario? Like will we be able to make proper decisions to grow? Will we have enough cash reserve? So like we changed our process to think of the negative scenarios versus the upside because we know upside's going to come, but you can't really foresee the negative downsides of buying a business.
Well, and naturally, you're going to be optimistic if you're in this world. Entrepreneurs are
Mhm.
optimistic, buyers are optimistic. Hey, I'm this amazing operator, or I know how to do sales. I'm going to grow this thing at least 10% year over year. And so you start to only look at the upside within that. What were some, you mentioned it, that some of the financial decisions in terms of growth you weren't able to make and you needed to flip over to preservation mode. What were some of the decisions that maybe the older owner without the debt could have made that you couldn't make because of like not forecasting that?
Yeah, so the other owner, so the owner that previously owned this plumbing company, like let's use a round number. He had like 700,000 in cash flow that he could play with. And so if he takes home half a million, that means he's left over with 200,000. With 200,000, if you look at how many employees you have, your salespeople, how much you're paying your sales, how much it costs to buy a vehicle, it's like, okay, based on what I know about this market, if I just invest today in a salesperson that's going to cost me 80,000 and I buy a vehicle for them, like now we're in at 120,000, like they could go out and just sell for a year. And the goal is that they bring in 3 to 4 times what we're paying them in terms of revenue. And because if they're able to do that, then we can hire an additional person, but we've already paid for that person through the sales and the leads. And so like they're able to just use additional cash flow to make strategic decisions. Whereas when we got the SBA loan, now instead of 700,000 in cash flow, we're looking at 350,000 in cash flow, which is still quite a bit. But when your interest rates increase, you realize, oh, you overpaid for the business by 400,000. Like there's all these factors. And then you have employee turnover where out of the 5 employees within 12 months, only one is still there. Everyone else turned over. And So training people costs money, and this is where it gets crazy. Like we thought because the seller hadn't ever spent money on advertising that like if we throw money at advertising, it would help grow the business further. Completely wrong. There's a reason why the seller never did advertising. Is
Is it because he tried it and it didn't work?
it didn't work. It was all word of mouth. It was all relationship based because the area in which we sold to from a plumbing standpoint cared more about quality and service over price. And so we didn't have to compete on price, which means we didn't have to advertise based on price either. And so, like, we threw money there. That didn't work. We worked with a consultant and realized that wasn't a good road to go down. So you start spending monies in areas where, like, you think it'll help. And you quickly realize that 350,000 dwindles really quickly when you start experimenting because all you want to do is grow the company. Like really, once you buy a business, what we realize now, if we went back, is we would have spent just the first like year to 18 months focusing on what makes this business great and what areas could we potentially tweak and dissecting those and seeing does it actually make sense to tweak those. Like we just went straight into action versus reflection and understanding.
So interesting. Well, part of it is you're a sharp guy. You've had a lot of success. I know your partners. They're really sharp. They've had a lot of success too. And you can get this overconfidence of like, oh, I know how to do this. Like I did this before. I know how to do marketing or I know this market and you just rush right in. Part of all of that. And then you have some turnover with your employees. Were there things that you could have done to keep them there or keep things stabilized? Or is it just hard to know? And some of that is employees just move on. That's just part of life, right?
Yeah, it's really hard to know. Like you can understand the hardest part of any business is the people. Is what can you do to make sure that they are enjoying what they're doing while making a meaningful kind of compensation? And like a lot of employees just left because like it was a lot of change at once. We realized that. We implemented and put more technology into place, which made it more stressful for certain people.
Change is hard, even if it's for the better.
It's yeah, and then you also
Don't change.
realize like you realize what the seller didn't tell you because in most cases you're not able to talk to employees beforehand, which is my one of my pet peeves with business brokers is you should always be able as a buyer to speak with the employees because essentially you're buying the cash flow, but there's people there helping generate that cash flow. And luckily, we were able with this seller because there's no broker to talk to the employees, but we didn't know all the internal dynamics and drama that was like encompassing and holding that team together. And so it was like there's so much to learn. Like it's fascinating owning a business that you care so much about, oh, let's buy it. But when you actually own it, it's like, oh, well, this is not what I expected.
Post operations is very different, right? Like getting the
Oh
deal
yeah.
done is not the end; it's just the beginning. How would you? Sellers a lot of times are like, I don't want you to talk to my employees in case you don't go through with the deal, right? They don't know
Yep.
about the sale. How are ways you could approach that? And this is coming from Ryan, like your background, and you do
Yeah.
700 plus valuations a year. Like you're in the thick of it for a lot of types of businesses. I guess in doing your own deals and creativity, how do you kind of squash that fear from the seller?
Yeah, great question. So, interesting perspective. So, we valued a business for an SBA lender as part of their loan process for an SBA 7A loan. And we did this valuation several years ago. And we were approached by an attorney, and now I had to participate in a deposition because it was known by the seller or supposedly known by the seller that one of the key employees was going to start their own competing business without a non-compete. And it's like, oh, this
And
is
that wasn't
interesting.
disclosed, and so post-sale, they leave, go start a competing business, they take a couple employees, they take a
Yep.
couple clients.
And
Yeah.
and one of the reasons that was brought up was, well, if the buyer was able to talk to the employees, like this would have been found out, or it would have been you would have been able to structure something in your purchase agreement, like a very common like clause or kind of what has to happen pre-closing is you have one of your key employees sign an employment agreement prior to the signing of the purchase agreement. And so I feel like and I haven't figured out how to do this well when approaching a broker or a seller. Like I feel like they feel that if we talk to them that we might take them away if we don't pursue the transaction. So I don't know how to approach that topic with brokers
Oh,
or
that's an
sellers.
interesting fear. So you're even saying like a seller's fear could be you poach their employees if you're like, yeah, we didn't go through with the sale. Let's go see if they're interested in switching.
Yep.
And I think like it kind of cuts both ways. Like I understand from a seller perspective, many times their employees don't know they're selling and they don't want to, let the cat out of the bag because then it does a lot of weird stuff. And then if they enter you as the buyer and you're 2 weeks away from closing and something happens and you don't close, and all of a sudden they just introduce this weird person that they never see again into the whole process of the business. And, maybe they're going back to market, maybe they're not. And now they got all this kind of internal dialogue at the water cooler trying to figure out, do they have a job and can they pay their mortgage next month?
Yeah. Well, and it's such an awkward topic because a lot of sellers don't want their team to know, but like there's a date in which they are going to know. The only difference is the sellers walked away with their money and the buyer is the one that has to deal with the awkward interactions with everyone. And the seller's like, well, see you guys. I'm gonna,
My money. Yeah.
so it's gonna happen no matter what. And like it's always interesting too from a buyer's perspective. Like if I had a chance to chat with all the employees, like there could be someone in that room that I'm like, holy smokes, like I'm buying the business, but really this person should be running the business. And they have all the connections with the current team. If I want to build a strong foundation, I should talk with this guy and figure out how to give him some sweat equity in this deal so that he keeps the morale going post closing. And so like we've Brent Parker, my business partner, and Ryan Auerkamp and I have chatted about how we go about doing this on some occasions. Yeah, employees are a very touchy topic.
Businesses are messy because they're made of a bunch of full messy people, and every person is messy in their own way.
Yep. Yep.
um, Ryan, I know we're out of time here. Appreciate your time. Tell us a little bit about Peak. I've worked with you guys a little bit. You guys do some great work. Tell us about a Peak valuation.
Yeah, so sorry for going from risk to employees. We covered a lot of topics and you and I can chat forever about the most random things with business acquisitions, but
We did
I
before we hit record.
I know. So
Yeah.
at peak business valuation, we value companies for individuals buying or selling businesses. Just background, we're at a point where we now value close to 28 to 32 a week, different businesses all across the country. And to me, it is just one big game of understanding why the same business in a city in Lehi, Utah, and its competitor are valued completely different, yet they're the same. It's just fascinating. So we help people understand the value of a business, and there are a bunch of other ancillary services. But if you have questions, you could always go to our website, peakbusinessvaluation.com, or call me 435-359-2684.
We'll link to all that there in the show notes, Ryan. And maybe we'll talk offline how we get access to that data. It sounds like an incredible data set you got there.
Oh, we have so much.
Ryan, thanks for your time today. We'll link to all that in the show notes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Ryan.
All right. Thanks for checking out the Let's Buy a Business channel. If you want to learn more, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel for the latest tips on acquiring businesses. We've also got our newsletter, which you can also subscribe to here, where you want to get the latest tips and deals that are happening right now. These are live deals. And then, of course, with the link below, you can join our course and memberships for the most serious searchers out there, and you want to get serious results.